On behalf of the Orthodox Union STAJE, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the second installation of our TNEC Learning Series. My name is Ariel Frankston Morris, and I work at the Orthodox Union Advocacy Center as well as for STAJE. STAJE is a Jewish organization dedicated to making retirement age years purposeful and meaningful. We are doing this by working with retirees in creating learning and service opportunities in your communities. STAJE organizes lectures, learning series, and meaningful volunteer opportunities. STAJE has partnered with the OU's Advocacy Center here in New Jersey. The OU Advocacy Center works to make sure our community has a voice in our state capitals, and we are focusing on education affordability and securing expanded funding for our day schools. We have created a program to build relationships with more legislators, and we need your help to meet our New Jersey elected officials. We are asking each of you to consider getting involved in this important advocacy project and to please sign your name on the form on your table if you're interested. We are planning a Bergen County advocacy training event at the end of November and hope you will all be able to attend. I would also like to remind everybody to vote tomorrow in the general election, as our votes really count and we need to make sure that our communities have a great voter turnout. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Menahem Meier, who needs little introduction, as many of us and your children and your grandchildren have had the merit and honor to learn with him in many of the different institutions that he's been, whether principal or teacher or even founder of. So I'd like to welcome Rabbi Meier.
Thank you very much, Ariel. It's a pleasure to be here at this event. I want to wish all of you a good Rosh Chodesh and a good Chodesh. I know many of you, as Ariel suggested, I would know. So there are two people in particular I want to acknowledge. One is my sister-in-law, Marcy Meier from LA, who happens to be in town. And the lecture I'll be delivering today was first delivered at the yahrzeit of my brother in LA, but I don't think there was anyone here at that lecture in LA, so I allowed myself to repeat it. And the other people I want to acknowledge are those two people whom I know longer here than anyone else. That would be Mrs. Pizer, formerly from Brookline, Massachusetts, and her daughter Daniela, who's currently from Israel, whom I know for 46 years. That means they're over 46 years old, and so am I. The last lecture was extremely interesting, and I hope to be able to be on that level of interest. You heard the last lecture dealt with supplements, with nourishment in our diet. There are two other things that are extremely important for seniors, and I talk to myself as well as to you, and that is be physical exercise to the extent that's possible, and mental exercise to the extent that's possible. Now, when I say physical exercise, I really mean it's an obligation. Just as a man puts on his tefillin 6 days a week, so a person, man and woman, should exercise as at least 3 or 4 times a week to the extent that's possible. Physical exercise is extremely vital 3 or 4 times a week, to the extent that, or if you can do it 5 times a week, that's fine too. The other aspect that I'm here to talk about today is mental engagement. The role of and I want to present to you the role of the rational mind, of rational thinking in halacha. And it's quite interesting that if we look at, let's say, 3 religions, Christianity and Islam, and compare them with Judaism in this regard, we'll make a very fascinating observation. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah, where the masses, men, women, young, old, rich and poor, which is the obligation of the study of Torah, which applies across the board, does not exist in Christianity for all. Maybe it was the priests who learned, but the priests in Roman Catholicism, who were the educated ones, were not allowed to marry. And without being married, if these were the brightest people in society, they wouldn't have any offspring. And without offspring, the genes of intelligence aren't transmitted. So Talmud Torah is a mitzvah that is not limited to any group. In Islam, there's heavy recitation of the Quran, but there's no popular study of Islamic law. Sharia, the imams and the scholars at the Muslim Islamic University, they do study Sharia, Islamic law, but there's no precept that every good Muslim who has to pray 5 times a day has to study Sharia or has to study the Quran. They have to be comfortable in the recitation of the Quran, but to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing parallel to the precept of the studying of the Torah. So in this regard, our faith community, our religion, I should say, has a unique obligation that is for every Jew to engage his mind in the study of the Torah. What does the study of Torah include? Well, I'm going to move to different levels. The first level is beyond the study of Tanakh, which is very important and unfortunately very neglected. Unfortunately, the study of Tanakh is terribly neglected, and it's almost like it's been the Orthodox Jewish world, and the more Orthodox you move in the Jewish world, the more it's neglected. Except, I must tell you, I visited some friends who live, I think the neighborhood is called Beis Yisrael. That's a neighborhood in Yerushalayim, near Meier Sharim. And there I visited some friends, and the boy goes to a cheder. And at the time I was teaching the book of Eov, and he was a 10-year-old boy. He was able to converse with me in the book of Eov. But that's the exception to the rule. It's really very sad and bordering on the tragic that the modern Orthodox community, which engages heavily in Daf Yomi and other aspects of the study of Torah, neglects Tanakh. And I'm not talking about the Shnai Mikveh. I'm not talking only about the Chumash and Ramban, but I mean Nevi'im and Ksuvim, which are really very rich repositories of wisdom and inspiration. But I want to focus the mind has a responsibility to understand halacha, all the details of halacha. And I want to show you something that I found really astounding. If a brisa, I know I'm getting a little technical, but there are many people here who have background as I look around the room. There's the Mishnah, the body of the Mishnah, and there's the body of the brises. The brises are often collected in what's known as a Tosefta. The brises were not as carefully edited as the Mishnah. The Mishnah went through a real scrutiny over the years, in the early years, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he really worked very hard in preparing the text of the Mishnah, which is the basis for the entire Bavli, the entire Yerushalmi, and everything that comes afterwards. And even with the Mishnah, the Gemara on numerous occasions allows itself to tell us, Chisure mechsera v'hachi katani. This Mishnah that we have, the text is deficient. And we have to make some accommodation in this text. Because the text, on what basis do they say it's deficient? Why do they say it's deficient? Because it doesn't make sense. The mind, the rational capacity of the Jew has to review the Mishnah, and everything in a Mishnah has to stand up to the test of human rationality within the system. So if the Gemara, in probably over a dozen cases throughout the Shas, and maybe even 24 times over Shas, says Chisurei Mechzor, this Mishnah is deficient, and here's a correction we have to introduce, it's because the Mishnah as it stands isn't making adequate sense, and therefore it has to be corrected. So that's one role of the mind in the study. The second role is that the mind is the source for creating halachos. Human rationality, human reason, I should say, is the source of creating halacha. Let me give you 3 examples of that. You all know, before you eat something, we make a bracha. We say on an apple, we say Barei Pir Ha'etz. After we know all the nutritional value of the apple, and we make a Barei Pir Ha'etz. And even if we don't know the nutritional value, we make a Barei Pir Ha'etz. The Gemara wants to know, where does that come from? This notion of a Bichat Hanenin. The conclusion of the Gemara, in Ketzad Mavarachim, it comes from human reason. If God created something, how can we enjoy something in this world without acknowledging Him as the one who provided it? So it's just human reason created the entire institution of Bichas Hanenin. Whether it's Hamotzi, whether it's Berei Pri HaGafen, whatever the Bichas Hanenin is human reason. How is it possible that we should consume something which is helpful, which is useful, which is tasty, and not acknowledge that Hashem is the one who provided it? I'll give you another example of the creative power of logic, of human reason. First I'll state the principle, then I'll give you an example. The principle is in Gemara Ksuvos, which we study together. When I say we study together, Matisyahu participates in Torah in the AM. It's a program that's at Keter Torah, sponsored by Keter Torah, on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the morning. We study an hour of Gemara each of those days from 9:45 to 11:15, and on Thursday we study the book, this year the book of Yeshayahu, from 9:45 for about an hour. So we studied the Gemara, which introduces us to a principle of Hapesha Asa Hu Hapesha Hitir. Let me give you an illustration of that. An unmarried young man and woman come to the study of a rabbi, and they say, we'd like to get married. So the girl comes, so he finds out that the man, if she's divorced, the rabbi will find out that he's not a Kohen, but the girl says in the interview with the rabbi, I come from Australia. I spent my early years in Australia. I got a get, and now I've met this young man, this gentleman, and we're prepared to move on and get married. We hope you officiate. So here the woman disclosed of her own initiative, totally of her own initiative, that she was married in Australia, and she got a divorce. The question is, does the rabbi have to pry and probe and say, well, let's see your get. Let's see your get. And the Mishnah teaches us a principle which is codified in Jewish law, saying that since the rabbi had no independent knowledge of her earlier marriage in Australia, he learned about it only through her sincere statement. and there was no independent knowledge of that she was married at an earlier time in her life. The same lips that established that she was once an Eshes Ish, that she once was married, are the same lips who informs the rabbi that she got a get. So since the same lips that introduced her earlier status as an Eshes Ish say in passing that she received a get, there's no need for the rabbi to send an email to Australia, to his colleague in Australia. The principle is, ha-pesha asa, hu ha-pesha hitir. Her lips established that she was an Eshes Ish, and in the same utterance, in the same meeting with the rabbi, she said, but Baruch Hashem, he gave me a get, he didn't hold me hostage, and it ended very, very well. So that's another. So where is that derived? It's a very significant legal principle. Usually when it comes to Eshes Ish, we're very, very stringent. The halachas of Eshes Ish are very stringent. And here there's a halacha that there's no need for independent verification or confirmation that you got to get. Where does that come from? That whole halachic principle of ha-pesha asa hu ha-pesha hitir comes from up here. If it meets the test of human reason, this woman who's now living in Bergen County, who comes from Australia, she offered a statement, and Mesiach Lefi Tuma, she added that I would also get Baruch Hashem, I got to get. You believe the whole parsha, and that's the end of it. It's just a very logical thing, and therefore this logical concept is codified in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, and in Halacha, known as ha-pesha asa hu ha-pesha hitir. I'll give you another example of the creative role of the human mind in Halacha. We all know that the Halacha for the three cardinal sins, that's Shvichas Damim, Avodah Zarah, and Gilu Arayos, the halacha is Yeharek va'al Yavor. That means if a person is under the gun, and he said, either bow down to this idol or surrender your life, for Avodah Zarah, the person, according to halacha, is required to surrender his life. There's a source for that in the Tanakh, in the Chumash. The Gemara brings a pasuk which is a source for that. If a person should say to a man, sleep with this Eshes Ish or surrender your life, if she's an Eshes Ish, he has to surrender his life according to the halacha. And there's a source for that also. And then, however, if he says, take this man's life or else I'll take your life, the halacha is he has to be willing to surrender his life. You can comb through the whole Tanakh, and there's no source. There's no source in the Torah which establishes that a person has to surrender his life rather than take the life of another human being. So where does it come from? It comes from the rational capacity of the human mind. That's a svara. What's the svara? How does anyone know whose blood is redder? That's an idiom. Whose blood is redder means whose life is more valuable, whose life is more precious. So if I were to say to someone standing here, take his life or else I'll take yours, there's no way the person I'm speaking to can say with certainty that that he's allowed to kill the person he's being told to kill, because who knows whose life is more valuable? Who knows whose blood is redder? And that's the reason, that is the source of Yeharek va'al Yavor in the area of Shvichas Damim. Any questions? Am I clear? Clear? Good. Yes?
Just to clarify that
Tell me your name.
Moshe.
Moshe, go ahead.
That don't we say a person's supposed to live by the mitzvahs and not
V'chai bahem.
Chai
That's I should have started that way.
Just one other thing also.
What?
It says chayecha kodman, that your life comes if you have what to eat,
Okay, I'll address that. Yeah, the basic principle in halacha is v'chai bohem, with the exception of these three areas these, and also chilul Hashem. I don't want to go into that. The exception of these three areas, chai bohem is put aside, and there's a higher value, and that is to surrender your own life, except for in these three areas. Okay, and chilul Hashem, which I don't want to go into now. So, and the other thing you mentioned is chayecha kodmim. That means if you're walking with a flask of water with a friend, and it's your flask of water, then, and if you share it, you're both going to die in the wilderness. You're stuck in a wilderness, and you have only one flask of water. Then chayecha kodmim, but not to do an aveira to kill someone else to preserve your own life. No, not to engage in murder to preserve your own life.
And are the other two seifel dik as well?
No, the other two have sources. The other two have sources. My friend Mr. Bardesh, the Kohen.
The first example about the get, is there no obligation to make an effort for independent verification?
Exactly true. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. If I must qualify, if the rabbi had no independent knowledge, then there's no need. Halacha does not require independent corroboration of her get. If his sole source of this information is the young lady in the study who volunteers this information, then he says, okay, it's fine, you were divorced. Just tell me about your friend who's with you. Is he a Kohen? And he said, no, he's not a Kohen. And then he can proceed to be Masada Kedushin. You got it. Okay. The last area of the role of the human mind is going to probably make a number of you uncomfortable. But that's okay. Right? It's okay? Good. It certainly is the position of Maimonides, and maybe others as well. What is that position? Why do we do mitzvot? The question why has a double meaning. The first meaning of why is, what is the proximate, the immediate reason for doing mitzvot? The most immediate reason. And the most immediate reason is that it's a response to Hashem. It's a divine imperative. It's a divine imperative. It's our responsibility to adhere to all of the divine imperatives. But there's the question why has another dimension to it. Not only, and that's true, the answer to the first question, why, that means that's true whether the mitzvah is either tzedakah or the mitzvah is eating matzah on Pesach. We do everything because it's a divine imperative. Even if it's ben adam lachaveiro, whether it's interpersonal relationships which are governed by the Torah, we shouldn't say, well, I'm nice to this person because it's good to be nice. It is good to be nice. But the real reason that one should be nice is that it's a divine imperative. How do I know what I'm saying is correct? Because with the Zion mitzvahs b'nei Noach, many of them are, which govern society, shouldn't steal, shouldn't engage in any gilu arayos, shouldn't kill, shouldn't engage in blasphemy. In any of those mitzvahs of Zion b'nei Noach, which govern all of humanity, not only the Jewish people, Maimonides insists that a good ben Noach observes these mitzvahs because they were part of divine revelation to Adam and then to Noach. And so therefore, the basic reason for adhering to mitzvahs is because it's a divine imperative. But if it stops at that, then we've missed out on an entire dimension of mitzvot. Because the question why has a whole nother dimension. And that other dimension is, what is the objective of adhering to these mitzvos? Why do we do them? Meaning, what are they supposed to accomplish with us? If we don't ask that question, then have we fulfilled the mitzvah? We've done the activity, but every one of Hashem's commands is goal-oriented. And the goal is either to make us into better people, to make us more mindful of God's role in the history of the Jewish people, or to improve the society as a whole, or to communicate things which are truths. So if we just do the mitzvot because it's a divine imperative, without ever exploring what the objective of the mitzvah is, then there's a deficiency in what we're observing. And Maimonides insists that the role of exploring the objective of mitzvos is a religious duty of the individual to use his mind to try to uncover the hidden, very often concealed objective of each and every mitzvah. Shlomo HaMelech, one of the wisest of all men, was unable to uncover the mitzvah of parah, the reason for parah aduma, the objective of parah aduma. Does that mean it has no reason, has no objective? No. Hashem, it would be, in my own judgment, and I think Maimonides would agree, it would give me a distorted concept of God to say that God gives us an imperative for the sole sake of obedience. I cannot believe in a God whose mitzvos are exclusively for obedience. Every mitzvah has to have an objective beyond the obedience of keeping the divine imperative. It's inconceivable that God should give a package of 613 mitzvot without each of those components having an objective either for society, for the individual, for his character, or for his mind. And that's why Maimonides develops this in numerous places. I have some sheets here. You're probably the youngest person here. And who else wants to give these out? Moshe. Maybe you can. I have more, don't worry. Who doesn't have? Very well. Anyone doesn't have? Okay. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides has a whole section in Chelik Gimel, the third section of the Guide for the Perplexed, from chapters 26 through 44 or so, 26 to 44 or so, where he develops the objective of mitzvot in 14 categories. The 14 categories are the 14 correspond closely to the 14 books of the Mishnah Torah. And in the Mishnah Torah, he has two major statements on Tamei HaMitzvot. This is the literature. This is part of the literature of ta'amei ha-mitzvot. Ta'amei ha-mitzvot means the reasons for mitzvos or the objectives for mitzvos. Now, the reason that people may become defensive about this and uncomfortable with this is that they misunderstand me, and they think I'm saying that a mitzvah whose objective we cannot uncover is meaningless, or we don't have to observe. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that every mitzvah should be explored in an effort to uncover the objective of the mitzvah. If we succeed, the mitzvah will have much greater impact. If we fail, we still have to observe the mitzvah, but we should continue trying to think about what could have been Hashem's objective in giving us this imperative. So in the Mishnah Torah, in chapter 4 of Hilchot Tumurot, he writes, and I'll read it with you in English, the Hebrew is there. Although the statutes, that means the chukim, the statutes are the chukim. Oh, as long as we mention that, you know the mitzvos can be divided into different categories. There are mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws which are either civil law or criminal law, which human mind can easily fathom. Eidot are mitzvos like the holiday of the Pesach and Sukkot, which are designed to serve as testimony for what Hashem's role was with the Jewish people in the history of the Jewish people. And the third category are chukim. Chukim are mitzvot whose reason and whose objective are not obvious, are not apparent. So the Rambam is addressing the chukim. Everyone understands the laws which govern the creditor and the debtor. In some cases, if he wants to recover a loan, he has to take an oath to recover it in court. Everyone understands the laws of mishpatim, that there's a reason. Everything makes sense, and you could advance the reason yourselves. Everyone understands the holiday of Pesach, that it's to every Shabbat. Everyone understands Shabbat is a reflection, reminds us weekly of not only Briyat HaOlam, but the Exodus from Egypt. So everyone understands those are Eidot. But people, by and large, don't understand the objective of Chukim. And it's much harder to penetrate and decode what the objective of Chukim are, what the objective of Chukim is. So let's look at the end of chapter 4. Although the statutes in the law are all of them divine edicts, as we have explained at the close of laws concerning sacrifice, yet it is proper, that means it's proper, it's not improper, to ponder over them and to give a reason for them so far as we are able to give a reason. That means we should use, how do we ponder and give reasons? We have to use our minds. Your mind is as good as anyone else's mind. The sages of the former time said that Shlomo HaMelech understood most of the reasons for all the statutes of the law. It seems to me that insofar as Tanakh has said, both it and that for of which it is changed shall be holy, that's a technical thing which I don't want to go into now. So therefore, would you go to the bottom of, and said, to the bottom of this paragraph, and both these laws to serve to suppress man's natural that which I skipped. Both these laws serve to suppress man's natural tendency and correct his moral qualities. And the greater part, now listen to this sentence, the greater part of the rules in the law of the Torah, that means, are but counsels from old, meaning that's a verse from Isaiah, from him who is great in counsel, to correct our moral qualities and to keep straight all our doings. That means the greater part of the Torah, even the chukim, even those mitzvot whose reasons are not apparent. For example, avoiding basa b'chalav. Avoiding basa b'chalav, meat and milk, is that a mishpat? No. Is that edod? No. It's a chok. Even the chukim are there to correct our moral qualities, to keep straight all our doings. And so he says, have I not written you excellent things of counsel and knowledge, that I might make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you might bring back words of truth to them that sent you. So Maimonides here argues very cogently that all the chukim do have objectives. It's sometimes they're very difficult to uncover the objective, but it doesn't relieve of a responsibility of reflecting on it to see what the goal is. Now, if you look at below, where on the vows, chapter 13, whoever makes vows in order to discipline his moral disposition and to improve his conduct displays commendable zeal and is worthy of praise. So he says because if a person makes a vow, in general, one should minimize vows. In general, one should avoid vows. One should really make a concerted effort not to take vows. However, if you take a moral vow to improve your moral disposition, I'll give you an example. It's not a good, one shouldn't take vows. But if it helps one overcome a certain barrier, for example, if a person smokes and he needs that extra impetus to get out of the addiction of smoking, and if he thinks that if he takes a vow, I hereby vow that I will never smoke again, and he thinks that puts him over the addiction, so to speak, then that's what the Rambam is saying in terms of a moral disposition, because smoking it would be deleterious to one's health. And just as I opened and saying that everyone, particular senior citizens, should exercise to the extent that's possible, so to smoking, which is deleterious to one's health, should be avoided. And if a vow helps a person overcome that vow, overcome that practice, by all means, if he can keep the vow. Now, if you turn to, how many of you consider this whole development here in Maimonides at all controversial? How many of you are upset by it? Are left ill at ease by it? That's good. I've made my Maimonidean case very well, that means. But look, turn the sheet in the landscape way. Is that what it's called? If you have a Word document, there's the Mahari Kurkus. Mahari Kurkus, that's Rabbi Yosef Kurkus. I think he was, I'm not sure, in the 15th century, I'm not sure. He wrote on this passage in Maimonides, when he wrote, let's see, Rov Dinei HaTorah Einam Ela Eitzos. He says, most of the laws of the Torah are but counsel from old. The greater part of rules of the Torah are from Mikol Makom Vadai Sheyesh O Ta'amim Penimim Lezeh Gam L'chol HaMitzvos Ki Lo Nitztavu Levat L'Takein Deotav. That's Maimonides. And here comes Mahari Kirkus. Chalila, God forbid, Litlos Davar Kadosh V'Ruchani B'Dvar Gashmi B'Derech Shlila Kasher Nire Kavanas Rabbeinu. God forbid that one should say that a holy mitzvah like putting on tefillin, that's a bad example because that's probably eidos. So a holy practice of a precept should be connected to something as material as making me a better person. A holy mitzvah has a holy objective, making me a better person. Seemingly, for the Mari Kurkus, is more of a mundane objective. So the holy mitzvos, some of them shouldn't be simply relegated to the realm of making me into a better person. And therefore he apologizes for Maimonides, and he says, Ubavadai laf bedafka kosav kain. Rambam couldn't have meant it when he said that the greater part of the rules, the greater part of the rules, that means the greater part of 613 commandments are, according to Maimonides, to correct our moral qualities and to keep straight all our doings. And that Maimonides said that the greater part of the mitzvos are to correct our moral qualities and keep straight all our doings. And the Mari Korka says, it's impossible. There must be some holiness attached to many of the mitzvos. And Maimonides, I think, would answer, there's nothing holier than making the human being holy. Because the only way to make the human being holy is by correcting any moral deficiencies. And so, just to review, the role of the rational mind in halacha. Number one, this is unique to Yahadut, or to Judaism. Christianity and Islam doesn't have it across the board for all people, men, women, old, young, rich, poor. Number two, it's the role of the human mind is in the study of halacha, which allows even the Gemara to say on a holy text of a Mishnah, Chisure mechsera v'hachi katani. This text is deficient, and we have to correct it based on the human mind. The human mind, number two, can also create, through a logic, a series of halachos. And I gave you three examples. One is the Birchas Hanenin. Two is Hapesha Asa Hu Hapesha Hitir. And three is Yeharik Val Yavor, that a person has to be willing to surrender his life rather than take the life of another, which is only Svara. And three, the role of the human mind is to probe and investigate the real objective of mitzvot. Any questions? Either I've convinced you or put you all to sleep, one or the other. Yes, Moshe.
I was going to ask, in terms of just the idea of connecting up with Hashem himself, where does that fit in?
Okay. That fits in that's an important point. That's a very important point. Connecting to Hashem himself. For Maimonides, that's in the mind also. The mind has to make a connection to Hashem. When we there are many mitzvos, for example. It's a very interesting question. I didn't plant him here, but it's a very important question. Many mitzvos, particularly ritual mitzvahs. Let me give you an example which doesn't relate to Hashem, then I'll take it to Hashem. The mitzvah of Avelus, Rahman al-Itzlan. You know, in the mitzvah of Avelus, we take off our shoes, we have a kriya, and we don't shave, in case of a man doesn't shave, and whatever the restrictions are of Avelus. That's the nihug Avelus. That's the outer manifestation of Avelus. The inner Avelus is the pain we feel in our heart when a dear one dies. So there's the external manifestation and the inner component. The inner component is the real fulfillment of the mitzvah of Avelus. Let's take it now with the Amidah, with the Shmona Esra. The Shmona Esra these are the words of each bracha. There are 19 blessings in the Amidah, and they have to be said correctly. During the time of the year when we say Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem, we have to say that. And during the time of the year when we say V'sein Talumata Livracha, we have to, or V'sein Bracha, we have to say that. And we have to add Yalav V'Yovo on Rosh Chodesh. All of that is very important. But all of that is the external manifestation of an inner kiyum, of Lifnei Hashem. When a Jew stands up and he takes, steps, 3 steps, and he says, Hashem sefasai tiftachu fi yagiti l'secha, the real kiyum is the keen, profound awareness that he's Lifnei Hashem. And connecting to Hashem is done through the inner component of many mitzvot. When a person is makabel ol malchus shemayim, he should say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and he should make it longer, and he should whatever he should do. Echad, that's fine. But the real kiyum is when he says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The real kiyum is what goes on in his head, or in his heart and head combined, that he's makabel ol malchus shemayim.
So does that, when you talk about history and the three things you mentioned, where does that fit in? Would you say, or how does it sum up or tie together with the mitzvahs in general?
Well, that has to be when a person does any mitzvah. Before I, let's say, tighten the straps on my tefillin in the morning, I think I'm doing this. I'm going to conclude in a minute. I'm concluding this. I'm about to tie the straps on the tefillin because it's Tzivui Hashem. When I tighten them, just before I tighten them, I say Asher Kiddushanu B'Tzosav V'Tzivonu L'Haniach Tefillin, because it's a divine imperative. So always has to be an awareness of Hashem. Any question? Yes, tell me your name.
I just wanted to ask you about the Chukim. In a way, isn't that blind obedience? We don't understand it. The right people did understand it. So we're just doing it because we're doing it.
We are obligated to observe the mitzvahs of the Torah. To the extent that we can uncover their reasons, the mitzvahs can have a greater impact. The chukim, I'll talk about the chukim. To the extent that we can decode their message, they can have a greater impact. But to the extent that we cannot decode their message, we still have to observe them. But Hashem didn't give them just for blind obedience. That's what Hashem did not give the chukim, according to Maimonides, simply for blind obedience. He gave them with an objective. And we have to use our minds to try to uncover their objective and decode their objective. But if we cannot, we have to be obedient.
Just occurred to me that we as parents always tell our kids to do something, we don't always have to explain why they're doing it.
So that's a parallel. Now that's an interesting question. That's an interesting parallel. It's a very interesting parallel. I'll tell you what he said. I'm going to repeat a very interesting parallel. And there are psychologists here, so I'll defer to them, but I'd like to ask all of you, which do you think is more effective? If a parent were to say to his child, let's say 10-year-old, I want you to do this just because he's 10-year-old says, why? And the parent said, because I said so. Or is it more effective if the parent gives a reason? I think it increases your safety. If you're going to wear a helmet when you're on the bicycle or when you're on the skateboard, it'll protect you if you should fall and you should avoid a head injury. So which is more effective? Right, Daniela?
Okay. So obviously with the safety of the helmet, I think it's more effective to explain it. But for example, when you have a child who's asking to watch a movie which is not on age level, and they insist that they want to watch the movie, and you explain to them, you say to them, you can't. You just can't.
You know why?
Because you can't, they won't understand.
Correct.
Exactly. The
Correct.
reason behind it.
So
And
they're not.
because I said so.
They're not yet at the stage where they can comprehend the deleterious impact on their neshama of watching an inappropriate movie.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean, that's a perfect discussion. That doesn't mean that there is no reason for a parent to deny his child to watch such a movie, because the parent understands the deleterious impact on the child, on the neshama of the child. But there is a reason, but the kid can't comprehend it yet. So from the kid's vantage point, it hasn't been decoded, so to speak, to use my language in connection with the chukim. Very good point, Dr. Boylan. Dr. Boylan. What?
Isn't man inherently limited in understanding Hashem's motivations and reasons?
Yes.
I mean,
but Maimonides said,
we have a certain mindset, but ultimately Hashem is unfathomable by man.
Hashem cannot be, we cannot really understand Hashem.
Right. Well,
We can't, but if he gave mitzvos, the Torah, to us, then we have a holy duty and responsibility to try to understand that which he gave to us. That which, how the world operates, the much grander world, all the magnificence of the cosmos, or of the microcell, of either cell biology or molecular biology. The sciences, they're still trying to unravel the mysteries of that which Hashem given us. And just like in the sciences, it's a mitzvah to try to decode the secrets of nature, so too in Torah, it's a mitzvah to decode the secrets of Torah. The last lecture was extremely interesting, and I hope to be able to be on that level of interest. There are, you heard, the last lecture dealt with supplements, with nourishment in our diet. There are two other things that are extremely important for seniors, and I talk to myself as well as to you, and that is be physical exercise to the extent that's possible, and mental exercise to the extent that's possible. Now, when I say physical exercise, I really mean it's an obligation. Just as a man puts on his tefillin 6 days a week, so a person, man and woman, should exercise as at least 3 or 4 times a week to the extent that's possible. Physical exercise is extremely vital 3 or 4 times a week, to the extent that, or if you can do it 5 times a week, that's fine too. The other aspect that I'm here to talk about today is mental engagement. The role of and I want to present to you the role of the rational mind, of rational thinking in halacha. And it's quite interesting that if we look at, let's say, 3 religions, Christianity and Islam, and compare them with Judaism in this regard, we'll make a very fascinating observation. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah, where the masses, men, women, young, old, rich and poor, which is the obligation of the study of Torah, which applies across the board, does not exist in Christianity for all. Maybe it was the priests who learned, but the priests in Roman Catholicism, who were the educated,
On behalf of the Orthodox United STAJE, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the second installation of our TNEC Learning Series. My name is Ariel Frankston Morris, and I work at the Orthodox Union Advocacy Center as well as for STAJE. STAJE is a Jewish organization dedicated to making retirement age years purposeful and meaningful. We are doing this by working with retirees in creating learning and service opportunities in your communities. STAJE organizes lectures, learning series, and meaningful volunteer opportunities. STAJE has partnered with the OU's Advocacy Center here in New Jersey. The OU Advocacy Center works to make sure our community has a voice in our state capitals, and we are focusing on education affordability and securing expanded funding for our day schools. We have created a program to build relationships with more legislators, and we need your help to meet our New Jersey elected officials. We are asking each of you to consider getting involved in this important advocacy project and to please sign your name on the form on your table if you're interested. We are planning a Bergen County advocacy training event at the end of November and hope you will all be able to attend. I would also like to remind everybody to vote tomorrow in the general election, as our votes really count and we need to make sure that our communities have a great voter turnout. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Menahem Meier, who needs little introduction, as many of us and your children and your grandchildren have had the merit and honor to learn with him in many of the different institutions that he's been whether principal or teacher or even founder of. So I'd like to welcome Rabbi Meier.
Thank you very much, Ariel. It's a pleasure to be here at this event. I want to wish all of you a good Rosh Chodesh and a good Chodesh. I know many of you, as Ariel suggested, I would know. So there are two people in particular I want to acknowledge. One is my sister-in-law, Marcy Meier from LA, who happens to be in town. And the lecture I'll be delivering today was first delivered at the yahrzeit of my brother in LA, but I don't think there was anyone here at that lecture in LA, so I allowed myself to repeat it. And the other people I want to acknowledge are those two people whom I know longer here than anyone else. That would be Mrs. Pizer, formerly from Brookline, Massachusetts, and her daughter Daniela, who's currently from Israel, whom I know for 46 years. That means they're over 46 years old, and so am I. The